Scientific study of homes. Homes. So if you have a home, you know what homes need, right? This is what, if you look it up, you'll find, right? That is the scientific study of the distribution and abundance of life and the interactions between organisms and their natural environments. So I highlighted the keywords, right? Ecology is about homes and interactions in homes. What do you need? What do you have in your home? What do you think of like in your home? Food, shelter, water, clothing, heating. So you need just climate control, right? You need things, right? What else do you have that maybe you think you don't need but you have anyway? People. You need people. Community. What else? Protection. Communication. Right? You need things to come in and out. Transportation.
Did anyone say kitchen or food?
Yeah, food. Yep. Hygiene. You need water, right? And right. You need a bathroom. You need things to leave your house, right? Right. So gets to be kind of a complex system, right? Like when you start to think about it, right? Even your super simple home, if you start to think about your campsite, if you live in your campsite long enough, you start to develop all these systems, right? This is where I keep this, this is where I keep that. So to get an idea of what's involved really in ecology in home, let's just look at this super simple thing here, right? A bowl of cereal, and this example comes from a previous docent and superintendent of this park, Frank Kabor, who this room is dedicated to. That's the Frank Kabor classroom. And this is the Frank Kabor Memorial Cereal Bowl. You cover every docent training. Okay? What's in there? Right? You all eat cereal at some time in your life. Cheerios. What's in Cheerios? Wheat, oats, sugar. Where did it come from? How did it get to your bowl? Plants. Right? So plants.
You've also got energy. Energy is represented in there.
They have energy in them.
Harvesting and processing.
Harvesting, processing, transport, right? Packaging. Preservatives, advertising, agricultural methods, right? Just to bring you this, there is a huge economic system, right? That is part of your home, right? That you tap into to eat this, right? That you are connected through what you eat to the people who grew the oats, the people who drove the truck, people who extracted the oil that went to the refinery, that fueled the truck, that brought you the oats. Right? And when you start to think about it, you can really quickly blow your mind. But just think about it a little bit. You are connected, right? You are connected to so many things. And this is just Cheerios, right? So I know Jim Crawley has in his bag of docent tricks. You'll find we all have our bag of tricks, right? Glenda showed me her gold and an acorn today, right? Jim has a cereal box. Well, not the whole box, but the front of the box, so he can tell this story to the kids. So they're, it's a good way to bring it home to yourself that you are, connected to everything. And then these are the poetic words of John Muir on this same topic, right? Is when you try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe, right? And that's a statement of ecology, right? It's all interactions and connections between the living things and the non-living environment. So let's get a little context on our living environment here. So we are here in Placerita Canyon, here in Southern California, right about there. We have a climate called the Mediterranean climate that determines what kinds of things can live here in our home in Placerita Canyon. There are other places in the world that have very similar climate that's dry most of the year, rain in the winter, right? Usually, right? Not too much rain this winter or the last few, but you know, over like, you know, hundreds of years, right? We have pretty much this pattern, right, of, right, dry most of the year, rain in the winter, and moderate climate. And other places that are on the trailing side of a continent and in this temperate zone have exactly the same kind of climate all over the world. And they have really similar looking plants and similar kinds of animals. So anywhere that has a Mediterranean climate. So we have, oh, this is an illustration from your binder that you get, Windows into the Wild, right, which is the training manual for all of the volunteers in LA County parks. Okay, it has some, you'll have some more specific information about this park, right, you get through those in training. But then you have these general things, and it has some beautifully endearing drawings like this. I always show this one because I love it. They go back to, you know, the beginning of these organizations, and National Parks volunteer, no, sorry, County Parks volunteers are started here in Placerita Canyon. And this illustration, it does a couple of things that we separate out now when thinking about ecology, but it covers the interaction of living things with each other and with the natural environment, and the flow of energy. And the flow of energy comes up in our presentation that we give to the kids, our whiteboard presentation when they come in, which is about the flow of energy through the different parts of the ecosystem. Okay, so let's just quickly run through here. So we have climate, right, and we have, right, this wind, personified wind, which is just so cute, right? The wind, the sun, the moisture determine what can live here, right? And then we have the rocks and soils, right, which provide some nutrients to the plants, right? So we're going like a little bit through a food chain here, right? So plants use sunlight, right? There's also this sunlight up here, which is the source of energy for the whole system, sunlight, right? That all living things, except for like a very few bacteria in some weird places at the bottom of the ocean, everything else on the planet gets its energy from sunlight. Life is fueled by sunlight. So plants, right, do photosynthesis and, right, using sunlight to put molecules that are not alive together into living things. Right? And then they can be eaten by herbivores or primary consumers, which are eaten by other things. And then eventually everything decomposes, breaks down, and turns back into soil. So that closes the loop, right? There's some energy embodied in all the living things. That energy came from the sun. Move on. Okay, and there are ways that things interact, right? We kind of break those out into biotic factors, things that are caused by biology, by life. Things that are caused by life, right? And a lot of emphasis on eating and being eaten, right? That's a real obvious, easy example that we can all relate to, and that comes up in our presentation to the kids. But when you're out walking around in the park, you're not going to see a lot of eating and being eaten. Okay? But can see some signs of things eating or protect or preventing being eaten. Okay. A special category of biotic factors are anthropogenic factors, and I added this in because the international organization that names geological eras has now named this the Anthropocene. You know, like, you know, the Jurassic, the Cretaceous, right? The Paleocene, the Eocene, you know. Heard all those sometime in the past. Mostly heard Jurassic because there's a movie, right? But you know what I'm talking about, right? Ages in the history of the Earth. We are in an age that's so different from the recent past that it got a new name, the Anthropocene. Anthropocene. What is it? Age of people. It's the age of people. We're in the age of people. That there is no place on Earth that is not affected by the activities of people. There are traces of human activity everywhere on Earth. Right? And that could be things like there's a little thin layer of radioactive material from nuclear bomb testing all over the Earth. There's a little bit of plastic fibers, microscopic plastic fibers that can be found like the bottom of the deepest trenches of the ocean and in the sand in the Arctic, right? So there are traces of things that we do, right? The composition of gases in the atmosphere is different now than before there was human activity. So we are in the Anthropocene, so there are special kinds of effects that are a subcategory of all the biotic effects. Abiotic effects are things that are not caused by biology, right? Like erosion, rain, other kinds of weather, sunlight, gravity, other aspects of the climate, fires. Okay, fires are a big organizing process here in the park, and we'll talk about that later, and I'm sure it'll come up at various times. When we have a fire, it changes the landscape dramatically, and then within about 7 years, you almost can't tell. So we'll look, when we go for a walk, we'll see that later. Okay, so a biotic factor, what do we see? You can always figure these things out, right? It's just a little bit of
eating and being eaten.
Eating and being eaten. Eating and being eaten. And is this it's a dog eat dog, it's a cat and deer world. Okay, so eating and being eaten. So what's happening here?
Transfer of energy.
Transfer of energy.
Eating a deer and like absorbing all the nutrients from it.
It's absorbing nutrients from the deer, right? So that, right, the lion is absorbing nutrients from the deer. Where did the deer get its nutrients?
Grass.
No, not now, before. The ones that it has, right, in its body. Go from eating plants, right? Yeah? And, okay, so these are herbivores. All of these things that eat plants are herbivores. And this one is a carnivore. Right? Okay. Carnivores, herbivores eat plants. All of these are things you're more likely to see than that, even though we have all these things in the park. Because these are way more common. Right? The lower on the food chain, the more of them there are. Okay, so these are all things you might see. Okay, now what's this? What's that? What is that?
Omnivore.
An omnivore, right? It's a raccoon. Thank you. Right there. It's a raccoon. It's an omnivore. It eats all kinds of things, right? These are the things that mostly things that it naturally eats. This is what it might eat, right? Where you see it at home or in the street, right? What else in this room is an omnivore? We are, right? Right? We are omnivores. Okay. And yeah, there are probably a few others. Possum is an omnivore. Coyotes are omnivores. Bear's an omnivore. Right? So they eat like lots of things. Omnis like everything. Eat any old thing. Okay. Omnivores are important in the system because if there are a lot of plants and not many animals, they can eat the plants. And if there are a lot of earthworms, they can eat the earthworms. Right? So they can act, omnivores can act as a balancing force, right? Balance out the system because they can eat anything, switch between what is rare and what's common. Right? So keep this in mind, you omnivores, right? You can do this, okay? Right? You naturally have this balancing ability, right? As part of this, your ecosystem, right? That's part of your role, to balance out, right? Don't eat the things that are rare. Don't eat the $3 million tuna, which was just sold. It's a real thing, right? Eat something that's not rare, but it doesn't have to be urban. Okay. Moving on. Okay, so this is an idea of a food chain. We're going to jump through this food chain. Everything here is something that you might find in Placerita Canyon, right? Caterpillars eat plants. Right? Caterpillars eat plants. They're an herbivore, right? They could be eaten by a spider, right? So that's a carnivore, right? Which can be eaten by a higher level carnivore, right? Carnivore that eats carnivores. Okay, we also have other things, other plants, right, in the system, and other things that eat plants and eat animals. And we have a lot more possible connections than that chain. In real systems, it's hardly ever a food chain. Food chain is like a model that's easy to think about, but it doesn't really exist, right? Most of the time, you have a food web, nearly always. Food web, a lot of interconnections, a lot of options, right? Like more than one thing eats blackberries, more than one thing eats ground squirrels. Okay? And there's more than one thing for ground squirrels to eat. Okay, so keep that in mind, that if it's a network, it's a web, there are a lot of connections. Now, getting back though to this simplified idea, we'll talk about this transfer of energy. Right? So energy comes from the sun, all the energy that fuels everything that we see here. Right? You look around outside, God, it's all sunlight. It's all held together by sunlight. Energy that holds the molecules together, that makes all of these amazing things. Right? The glue that makes that structure, that makes it possible, is sunlight. And, you know, takes these little, life takes like things, just molecules, just minerals, just air, puts it together, right? We use it together with sunlight. And then also all the action, all the movement, all the activity, fueled by sunlight. Okay, and the sunlight comes into plants, which do photosynthesis. And photosynthesis is like magic. Right? So photosynthesis is taking things from the air, right? Water vapor from the air and CO2 from the air, and just in the light, putting them together and making plants out of it. Right? Just gas from the air, plants. Right? So, right? Photosynthesis is this process that fuels life, right? That runs life. And it's the opposite of what we do with our metabolism. We take molecules, we break them apart, and we release water, right, and CO2 and energy, right, that we use to fuel our activities and fix our bodies and grow and, you know, all the things that we do, right? So photosynthesis and a process called cellular respiration, they're the opposite processes of each other. But they are the main energetic pathways in life. Right? The photosynthesis is taking the energy from the sun and putting it in living things, and respiration reverses that, releases the energy back out. Okay, so plants, right? The plants feed the herbivores, and the herbivores feed the omnivores, and the carnivores, right? Also, plant. There's kind of a, you know, another path here, and then those get eaten by apex predators, and all of those things, when they die, get broken down, right? Which is just more digestion by bacteria and fungi. And right.
Question?
Oh yes.
Unless I missed it. What's the apex predator?
Okay, the apex predators are the top predators, and or the third level predators. So in this picture, right, this spider is a predator on this herbivore, and then this lizard is a predator on the spider, right? So that's a second level predator. And then actually those can be eaten by hawks, right? So that's now a third level predator, right? Or fourth level of animal, right? So now that tertiary predator is an apex predator.
Okay.
Okay, yeah.
So, like, say it's hot and you walk by a bunch of plants and it's cooler in it, is that the cellular respiration?
That's actually, that is such a, that's absolutely true. That is, the plants are bringing water up, something I didn't talk about, but they bring water up from their roots and it evaporates out of their leaves, which is part of how they get their water supply. So that bringing the water up and evaporating out of the leaves makes it more humid around. And then it feels cooler. So that's not from the cellular respiration directly, but from this, it's called transpiration, which sounds like trans-inspiration. It's that moving of the water out to the atmosphere. Yes?
You could see that driving up as the plants are in the sun, like fog.
And there are places in the world where they're called cloud forests, where the trees actually bring the water up and it makes it cloudy and full of fog. From the trees, not from the water coming out of the air, but from the water coming out of the trees. Okay. All right. So in our presentation, to make the tiny, non-charismatic, but very, very important things seem more exciting and memorable, we call them the FBI. Okay? The FBI breaks down the stuff that's left over, that's not alive anymore. Fungi, bacteria, insects, and other creatures of the soil. Right? The FBI are things that, you know, are not dramatic and gorgeous like that mountain lion, right? But they're really important, okay? That bacteria, we can't even get a good picture of, but they're there everywhere, right? There are bacteria all over every one of us. You have more cells of bacteria. You have, back up a little bit, you have trillions of cells in your body, individual little packets of life, right? That your body is made of trillions of cells. That's into realize how incredibly cool you are. And, right? You are made of trillions of cells that work together and make your whole body work. You have at least an equal number of bacterial cells that live on you and in you on your surfaces, right? So you are trillions of human cells and trillions of bacterial cells, which sometimes upsets people and makes them feel like they gotta go take a shower. But it's not a problem. You need them to be healthy. They are part of a healthy living organism. But they don't photograph at all, like well. So we don't have any pictures of them. We know they're there. Mostly identify them by looking at their genetic sequences, using machinery. But we do see a lot of fungi, right? You'll see fungi in the park, right? You'll see, beautiful little mushrooms, and we see some that stick around longer. I'll point some out on our walk today. Thing to know about mushrooms is that mushrooms are like the flowers of the fungi. The mushroom is the fruiting body, right? Has the spores, produces the spores, and it's just a little small part of the whole body of the fungus. Right? The fungus is growing all through the soil or all through the rotting wood, right? They are microscopically thin, right? You can't see them, right? They are really, really tiny, long filaments, so thin that in a cubic inch, right? Cubic inch of soil in a nice, nice wet forest can have a mile of fungal fibers in it. And the soil and anything that's dead and decaying is full of little fibers of fungi. And the right, yes?
And Janet, I was led to believe that that's like the internet of the plant world.
Yes, that they sorry, no. Perfect. Because communication is one of the things we need to know, right? And plants communicate through the fungi in the soil, right? So it is something that the world has, right, that we maybe weren't aware of until pretty recently, right? That there is this communication network through the soil, which is filaments of fungi, and that it can pass actually food from one plant to another and chemical signals from one plant to another through the soil, through the fungi. And the roots of plants are covered with fungi. And some plants actually have special structures that feed the fungi and keep them safe inside structures in the roots of the plants. So, also with bacteria. So there is this whole, right, mycelium is what it's called, mycelial network in the soil. And also in things that are being digested by fungi, right? Like any log with fungi in it, like it's all woven through the wood, slowly digesting it. Okay, so the mushrooms, we only really see them, when they're ready to release their spores, usually after it rains, because what'll happen is there'll be a little initial thing, right, sitting under the surface, waiting to grow, right, a little like microscopic mushroom. And when the soil gets wet, all these filaments absorb water, and the water flows up and it kind of inflates the mushrooms. And that's how the mushrooms, how they appear overnight, right? How it rains and the next day there are mushrooms in the lawn, right? And how did they grow so fast? Well, they were already there in a very concentrated form, and then they fill up with water when the ground gets full of water. Yeah.
But if, let's say in your soil, you didn't have that fungi,
Uh-huh.
that prevalent. With plants, I mean, I assume the plants do better with it there, but there must be cases where it's not.
Yeah, so most plants can live without it, but they don't do as well. They don't grow as big, they don't survive having insect predators and things as well.
In the natural world, maybe about 80 to 90% of plants require it.
Oh, they have it.
They have it to do well.
Yep, but you can take a plant and put it in sterile soil and grow it.
Grow it down well.
Right, and you'll have to protect it from everything.
Can you say that one more time?
You can take, most of the plants in the natural world have fungi associated with their roots. And you can take the plant or take seeds and grow them in a sterile environment without any fungus. And most of them will grow, but you have to provide them with nutrients and water and protect them from things, right? The unnatural situation that requires maintenance wouldn't be water.
Jenna, that brings up the fact that today you could go to the store. It used to be you would go to the store to buy sterilized soil to grow your plants in. Now you go to the store and you buy, planter mix that has mycelium and certain additives
Yep,
like
Yeah.
that.
inoculated soil that has bacteria and fungi in it already, because it's better than sterilized.
Janet, I have, after all these years sitting through these classes, I have a question. You talk about the mycelium, the fungi under and how they break down the wood or the whatever. I'm assuming that's a chemical process because those little things, those aren't like little mouths,
Nope.
So it's a chemical process that the mice break down the
Yep.
material into. Okay.
So, right, they're releasing from the surface of these little threads that something like our digestive enzymes that we release inside our stomach, right? They release that outside, dissolve things outside themselves, and then they absorb those nutrients back,
Okay, good. Thank you.
right?
I have a question.
Yeah,
So when you're out and you see a big tall pine tree and it's got mushrooms sticking out of the sides and the tree's dead.
it's not necessarily dead, just that some part of it's dead. So when you get to plants, right, is it like next week or sometime, plants come up, you'll hear more about how plants grow. But trees grow from the outside. All right, so the outside, just under the bark, is the living part of the tree. So the wood on the inside is like not alive, right? It's left over from when the tree was growing before. It's like kind of left behind. It still has a structural role in holding the tree up, right? But it's not alive anymore. It doesn't have any living cells in it. Trees grow from the outside, just under the bark, right? And the bark grows out, and the tree grows out, right? Which is why the trees grow wider. They grow taller and wider. They grow out from the edges, the outside. Right? They don't grow like like a place on a tree this high doesn't end up this high next year. Right? It's always right there. And the tree just spreads out from there, which is why it kills a tree to cut the bark off. So sometimes people will, want to get rid of a tree and they'll cut a circle of bark all the way around because that cuts through that living part on the outside. So the inside, the mushrooms can be digesting the inside of the tree while the outside's still alive.
Okay.
Yeah. But it'll get weak over time. It's going to take that structure out. All right. So in the soil, there are also food webs, right? Just like there's a food web that we can see on the top, right? Down here, the FBI have their own kind of food web, right? So there are insects, there are fungi, right? Here's some bracket fungi, they're perennial fungi. You can see them. They're not like a soft mushroom, they're a little bit woody, and you can see those all year round, and we'll see them out on our walk. This is a mushroom. These are, pill bugs are not exactly insects. They're another kind of little creepy crawly millipedes also. So, and insects. right, blown up and illustrated in a way that you will never see in the wild. Some bacteria and archaea. There are also a lot of little microscopic worms in the soil that are part of the FBI, right? So all of these things also are engaging in a food web, kind of like this, right? That there are dead things to be eaten, and there are things that eat the dead things, and things that eat those things, right? The living material gets passed along, right? And different can become part of different bodies, right? The energy that came from the sun into the plants can be passed on, right, to the next level of the food web, and when they get eaten, it can be passed to the next level. Okay. So again, we can name these things, right? The producer or the plants are the producers, the things that do photosynthesis. Way to remember that, if you find this producer-consumer thing confusing, is that when you go into the store, where do you find the plants? Into the grocery store. The produce section. Okay. Right? The producer section. Right?
Trader Joe.
You get a little confused in LA, right, about producers. Little producers. Okay. And then consumers are the things that eat the producers, right? Or eat the things that ate the producers, right? Okay. There are always more producers than everything else, and there is some inefficiency in the transfer from one step to another, right? And it's like 10 or 20% of the energy that's in a plant gets embodied in the herbivore. And then it's 10 or 20% of the herbivore's energy that gets embodied in the next level. Right? So it takes, you know, a lot of plants to support one tertiary consumer. Right? And it takes less plants to support one herbivore. So that's just something to think about the energy relationships in living systems. Okay. Now, I put this into market transition, and I forget why. Okay. Market transition to Sandra's question, which we have already covered. Okay, which moves on to this one, right? Because now I'm thinking about, okay, there's that communication through the soil, through the fungi. What other ways are things connected? Right? Like we talked a lot about and focused a lot about eating and being eaten. What else? Other ways are things connected in living systems. Pollinization, right? So dispersing each other or carrying each other's seeds around or pollen, right? So that's one way that plants and animals interact. I know it's going to end soon there. Okay, which is a clue to another way that things are connected, interact, besides being eaten. Sounds, right? So, right, we were just
On cue.
there was a sound, right? Right? Which was like, you know, get out of the way, right? But animals also make sounds to communicate, right? So you'll hear, you know, when you go on walks, if you're lucky, right, you'll hear some birds making look out, scary big animal sound, right? They'll make an alarm call, right, when you're around. Some small animals will also make alarm calls when you're around, right? Okay.
Breeding purposes.
For breeding purposes, right, there are bird songs where birds communicate with each other to call each other in, or coyote howls, right? So what was it? Missed it, yes.
The alarm sound, is that to tell their buddies or to make them feel better?
Usually it's assumed to be to tell the other members of the same species that there's something to look out for. But there are definitely cases where one species responds to another species' alarm sound.
Skunk.
And skunk, that's another one, it's a chemical signal, a smell, right? There are lots of chemical signals, right? So the skunk smell is a get away from here smell and giant smell, right? But there's lots of small smells, right? That when you go around for a walk, there are a lot of plants that smell here, right?
Yeah.
Like sagebrush, right? That sometimes that smell or taste can deter things from eating it. Sometimes it can attract things to pollinate it, right? Sometimes it can attract something that is protector. So there's a well-documented example of kinds of plants, trees that make a signal that when they are being eaten by a caterpillar, they can tell from the chemicals in the saliva of the caterpillar what kind of caterpillar it is, and then release a chemical signal into the air that attracts wasps that lay their eggs in that kind of caterpillar.
Nice.
Take
Yeah,
that.
it's way smarter than you think, right? So they're incredibly impressive chemical signals, right? There also are moths that communicate on the same frequencies that bats use to hunt. So they make themselves invisible to bats by blocking the sonar of the bat. Okay, so there are so many things out there.
Nature is awesome.
Nature is awesome. Yes, and more you learn, the more awesome it is. And that is one of the great things about what we're doing here. This little example is just one of the things that's flowering in the park right now, and it just has a bright pink flower to attract pollinators.
What are we looking at? Plant. Is that mallow?
Currant.
No, that's
Currant. Thank you.
So color is another one, right? That some things are brightly colored as a warning, some things are brightly colored as an invitation, right? So polyleaf cherries are brightly colored as an invitation to things that might eat them and carry the seeds off, right? These are, right? And other things like king snakes are brightly colored in a way that says, don't come near me, I'm poisonous, venomous. Did you have a question?
King snakes aren't venomous.
No, not to people that are like, don't eat me, like a warning.
Okay.
Yeah. Not that they're going to bite you.
No.
No.
I was gonna say, taste, some plants have a very bitter taste or some kind of
Yeah.
taste.
Yep, so, yeah, chemical communication. Okay? All right. Now this is a signal to talk about the tree of life, right? Which is another way that all living things are connected, but not in a communication way, but in relatedness, right? That all living things share some genetic information, some genetic history. We can only assume that, they're all made of the same thing. Right? That every living thing has a similar system of molecular interactions, biochemistry. And every living thing has genetic information in DNA molecules, right? And we can use that genetic information to make a picture of how genetically similar things are. right? We call that the tree of life, right? Right, that goes back to the mythical tree of life, right, which shows up in all kinds of cultural stories, right? Whether it's the great tree of the universe that connects the worlds, or just the tree that has all the animals and plants in it, right? So that mythical idea is kind of leveraged by biologists to say we can have an organizing structure for how genetically similar every living thing is, right? Whether they're to each other. Close together on the tree, right? They share a lot of genetic information. We assume they share a lot of genetic history. Far away on the tree, we assume, because they don't have much genetic information in common, that they're not closely related. Okay, so this is a big oak tree on Golden Hills like we're used to. So we're a family tree, okay? It's a cartoon tree, right? We're still okay, okay? Everyone feels good, still a tree, we love new trees. Okay, here's a tree, right? And instead of acorns, it has some nasty words on it. Nasty, unmemorable, long Latin words. But, okay, it's a tree. We love trees, okay? There are two big parts of this tree. This tree is arranged so that the things that are close together have more genetic information in common. Things that are far apart have less genetic information in common. Okay? They're all similar enough that you can cut a piece of DNA out of one and put it in another one. I don't know if you can, but someone can. You could, within, someone just gave you the right tools, right? And it works, right? You get a piece of DNA from something over here in the tree, could be put in something over there in the tree, and it still works, right? So it's all basically life. It all works about the same way. And we have all these different kind of, versions of it, right? All these different things we're used to. Okay, so we have this big group called eukarya. This is everything with big, complicated cells. Right? And everything down here are prokarya, things with small, simple cells. Okay? Of all the things with big, complicated cells, here are the animals, and we are in there. Also in here are the fungi, right? They have big, complicated cells, but we're different, right? Plants have big, complicated cells, right? Algae, right? These are mostly single-celled things, some of which you may be more or less familiar with, like euglena shows up a lot, right? And looking in the pond water exercise, where you look at pond water at the microscope, which I love, and which we do with the stream box here, right? Where you see all the cute little, protozoa in there, right? And Giardia, some of you might know, right? You might have intimate knowledge of. Okay. Down here on the bottom, we have these things with the simple cells, archaea and bacteria. Archaea and bacteria are as different from each other as bacteria are from us. Right? They are really different from each other. And this whole group, no one even knew they existed until the 1970s. Okay? But they are microscopic and, not charismatic or delicious. So, we didn't notice them.
And Janet, every time you do this, I'm reminded that, some people that are my age, that went to school in the 50s and 60s, we had plants, animals, and euglenas, somewhere euglenas in the middle, like we don't know.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yep. Yep. So now, right, there are a lot more different. And there's something called the Tree of Life Web Project, which is you can find on the web, right? treeoflife.org, and that, or just search Tree of Life Web Project, and there's a tree that has you know, the relationships of every species for which there's genetic information. And you can't look at it all at once, but you can zoom into parts of it and, you know, look at the relationships between things. And
Here's a question.
yeah.
So how does grafting work? How, I mean,
Okay.
grafting, you
Uh-huh.
know, I just read something last night about, you know, a citrus tree. How does that work? Just the same DNA can attach?
What happens is the plants are closely enough related that if you transplant a branch from one tree onto another one, that tree will support that one. It doesn't change the genetic makeup of either part, right? Which is why you can graft a bunch of fruit tree branches on and get 5 different kinds of fruit on one tree.
Amazing.
It's amazing, but it will supply, right, the water and energy, right? So they'll support each other like an organ donation from baboons.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do viruses fit anywhere in here?
Viruses aren't included on here. Viruses are like a little part of a living thing that can't live by
Not
itself.
live, but.
Yeah, but they're like a little piece of life, right? They can get picked up and used. Yeah.
Jared, how does archaea function? How is it different from bacteria?
They're a lot like bacteria. You wouldn't really know they were different unless you looked at their genetic makeup. But mostly archaea live in less what we think hospitable environments, so deep in rocks, in volcano vents, mostly in extreme environments. But yeah, but if you had to like pick one of these two, of bacteria and archaea, that is more similar to humans, that might be, you know, if you want to say they were ancestral or connected to the origins of humans, it would actually be the archaea. Okay.
Janet, just because that sparked something in my mind,
Uh-huh.
because I've read about things that live underneath the ocean, these events that come up and there's no oxygen and it's really a hostile environment. Is that where archaea?
No, those are bacteria.
Oh, those are bacteria.
Yeah, chemosynthetic bacteria. So they're the ones that don't use sunlight.
Yeah.
So they use this hot sulfur compounds as a source of energy. So it's like the exception to everything's run on sunlight. All right, moving on from that scary tree. Okay, so, right, we have, right, lots and lots of variety of organisms, right? So you just need to know that they're all related, and of all the things, right, that there are, what can be here in Placerita Canyon, of all the things on Earth, right, depends on what the climate's like here. But we have this limited number of things that they can live here because they can survive in this climate, and it depends also on the history that they have been here, right? So there are no kangaroos here, right? There are kangaroos here. There are no kangaroos here because they didn't get here. Okay, they weren't here before. Yes.
What sort of interests me is I read that a lot of the invasive weeds in this state, they come from other Mediterranean climate zones. Like Arundo comes from Italy,
Yep.
and Sahara mustard comes from like the Middle East,
Yep.
and like iceberg comes from South Africa.
Yep. So you see, they're all here, right? They're all in a similar kind of climate. Those things can survive here. They weren't here before, so they don't have a network of interactions. So they don't have predators that eat them, right? So they can grow out of control because they're not in the network, right? So they're not in balance, and that's how they become invasive. So actually, California poppies, which are, you know, we have here, they're invasive in Chile. Because they don't belong, they can survive there, but they don't belong to the network there. Yeah, that's a fascinating thing. Okay, so the kinds of collections of plants that we have here are 3 main categories. The what we call plant communities, or sometimes think of it as ecosystems, but they're parts of Placerita Canyon that are dominated by particular plants. And she stepped out. As she said earlier, right, particular plants can change the microclimate. They change what it's like in that area, right? So we have 3 major plant communities which are illustrated in 3-dimensional hyper-realistic dioramas in our museum, right? We have the southern oak woodland, which is dominated by oak trees, okay? And also you want to check out some close-up information about oak trees out on the table when we take our break that Sandra has provided for you, right? So oak trees, right, they make it shady. They make fewer plants underneath the oak trees. If you go over to our picnic area, right, which is dominated by big oak trees, right, there's not much on the ground. And if you look in our museum, right, there are not many plants on the ground level, right, but they're the oak trees, and it's relatively shady and dark and humid compared to everywhere else in the park when you're under an oak tree.
And it's wonderful to be there in the middle of summer.
It is.
It's like air conditioning.
Yes, oak conditioning.
Nice.
Okay, and then we have the chaparral, right, where there are no big trees. Everything is shrubs and bushes. It's very tolerant of dry weather, even in the dry season. There's some suggestion that chaparral is expanding as other parts of Southern California sort of dry out, right? The chaparral is spreading. Chaparral is shrubs that are very good at reducing their water use compared to other plants. That they have small leaves that don't evaporate much water out of them, right? Those leaves are, again, you'll hear more about this in botany, right? The leaves tend to be a little reflective and silvery, sometimes a little hairy, right? They don't absorb as much sunlight. They don't heat up as much as big flat leaves. They don't lose as much water. Some chaparral plants can just lose their leaves and be dormant if there's really not enough water. Yes?
Could you just give some examples of some species of it?
Oh, when we go out, we'll see.
Oh, okay.
It'll be easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, than just looking at pictures. So, the chaparral exhibit in the museum is on the south-facing wall, because that's where the chaparral tends to be in the park. And we'll see some when we're out. And it's easier than looking at it here.
You're talking about like the mountains, the south-facing versus the north-facing, the different plants.
Yeah, you get different plants, right? Because why? You know?
Shade and
Because the shade of
some exposure.
because the north-facing side is cooler, right, and it doesn't lose water as much. And the south-facing side gets way more sunlight. And then we have the riparian ecosystem, which is along the stream. Along Placerita Creek is having a dry spell. It's changed, like in my time here, you know, being in Placerita, you know, for, I guess I've been here about 20 years, I've been coming here. And the stream used to run every winter, right? Some people will say the stream used to run, you know, say like 70 years ago, the stream ran all year round, but there really is no historical evidence for the stream running all year round. And actually the people who had the park before it became a park, the Walker family, used the stream bed as their summer road to their summer house up the road, up the canyon. So it couldn't have had water in it all the time because it was their road. So, but the stream is an intermittent stream. It should run in the wet season and then sink down in the ground in the dry season. But we haven't seen water running in the stream too much in the last few years, except when we had a couple of big flooding events, right, which brought a lot of silt and made it very wide and changed the look of the creek in a fascinating way. Like, I wouldn't have thought that it could change that much. Anyhow, there are plants and animals that live specifically around the wetter parts of the park where the stream usually is. There are plants that are mostly require a little more water to live than the plants that live in the chaparral. And plants that survive being broken or and can regrow from shoots like willows and mule fat, right? If the stream washes out, they can replant themselves later, right? And then there are lots of insects that live part of the time in the water and part of the time out of the water. So their life cycle fits with an intermittent stream, right? If there are larvae at the time of the year when there's a stream, and then they hatch out at the time when the stream dries down under the ground, right? Then they're perfectly matched with the stream, right? So what is an animal that lives like that? Dragonfly, right? A frog, amphibians live like that. Salamanders. There's one, it is actually the most deadly to humans animal on the planet. Mosquitoes. Mosquitoes, right? That mosquitoes live in the water and hatch out. Right, and again, in the museum, in the riparian display, you can see some of the insects and amphibians, which we used to, at the time that we designed the museum, we saw every year regularly and have not really seen much of lately. So, you know, big cycles, we'll see what happens. Okay, so those are our three major plant communities. What are they then? We're all getting near break time. We're near break time. Riparian. Oak woodland. Chaparral. Okay. All right. So this was the ecology talk. This was a thing from my childhood that some of you may remember. The ecology flag. When we realized that, you know, people first realized that things were connected in a way that mattered. Right, that human activity was connected to other things, that humans could have a big enough influence that you could see it in the natural world. Right? Now we know that there's no place we don't affect. Right? So that was the question back then. Right? Is it connected? Okay. Now we have sustainability as a way of being active in ecology. Do you think, you know, can the things that we do be sustained by the ecosystem, right? How long can we be doing this, right? Does this ecosystem support this? So this building is a LEED certified building. When there was a redevelopment of the building, changed the heating and air conditioning, insulation, materials used like for carpeting and other parts of the building, kept the original prize-winning structure of the building, but changed a lot of the systems to make it more sustainable. Right? This was the first LEED certified repair of a building in LA County. Okay, so that is a certification of how environmentally sustainable a structure is. Okay, now we have this. This is where ecology is going now in terms of research, really, is network analysis. It's thinking about that whole network and what activities make that network more stable, right? More able to last in the long term, or less stable, right? More likely to collapse, right? And we have examples of ecosystems that have collapsed in different parts of the world, and ecosystems that are thriving, and how do we make our world more like a world that's thriving?
Like a what?
Like an ecosystem that's thriving, that's flourishing. How do we make our place flourish? right? How can we have lots of life, lots of living things, lots of diversity, and still do the things that we want to do? Is that a question? No. Okay. All right. So, ecology. All right. Now, I usually bring a stack of books and recommend some books, but I didn't bring the actual books this time. I just brought pictures. Okay.
Less to carry.
Yes, less to carry. And also, I was having some work done at my house, and I had all the books packed up. So, this book, The Hidden Life of Trees, is all about how trees communicate with each other, with other things. This is an amazing book, The Hidden Life of Trees. The subtitle is What They Feel, How They Communicate. It just will change your view of trees, and you realize that there are not just things that show up in your environment, but they're actively doing things. This book, The Tangled Tree, is actually about genetic relationships among things. So I was talking about the bacteria and the archaea and all the different kinds of living things. This is a book that explains how people collect that information and organize it, and what that means for the way we understand the world. It's very well written. And then this, right, California Natural History Guide, Introduction to California Chaparral. In the broad sense of California, pretty much everything here is chaparral, and our plant communities are little example subsets of the broader chaparral Mediterranean ecotype. So you can really understand a lot about Placerita Canyon from a book like that, in this book about the chaparral. Also, the website of the Chaparral Institute, I recommend. Just Google chaparral and get there. So these are 3 books I recommend for supporting your understanding of the ecology. Okay, and when you get your Windows into the Wild binder, then that has a section in it that pretty much covers everything that I covered.